and welcome back to Pod Junction Podcast, where podcasters learn to grow their business. I'm Sadaf Bainan, and beside me is the usual suspect, Matt Edmondson.
Usual Suspect. Have you ever seen that movie, The Usual Suspect?
Yes, I have.
The best thing the devil ever did was to convince the world he didn't exist. Kaiser Sose. Sorry if I've just spoiled the movie.
Yeah.
But it is a good film. You should definitely watch it if you haven't seen it. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted massively there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It was The Usual Suspects.
Yes. All right. So today we've got the fourth and final segment from Stephen Pemberton, who is the host of Voice Like a Lion. And in this particular segment, he's explaining his approach to audience engagement.
I just wondered if you're going to get that out.
Yeah.
Felt that was a bit of a struggle.
In this particular episode, you're going to learn how blending stories with actionable advice keeps your listeners coming back.
Are you sure you got sleep?
Yes.
Good.
Way better than yesterday.
Just full disclosure before Sadaf carries on. She came into the office yesterday like a zombie. It was so funny. It's like you said to me yesterday, do you fancy a cup of tea? And I was just not convinced I was going to get tea. I thought it was going to come back something completely
Coffee.
different. Yeah. Not even that. Maybe just like water from the sink that you'd been washing the pots up in or something. I don't know. But it was just really funny. So I'm glad you got sleep.
Yes, I
still think it needs to filter through a little bit. Or maybe you got too much sleep.
Give me another week.
Give me another week. Brilliant. Because you're up till 4 o'clock in the morning, you big dirty stop out.
Yes.
I don't know how you did that. I'm sorry, I know we should be talking about podcasting, but I just genuinely, I'm really amazed that you can do that.
Yeah, I was talking with my sister.
Yeah.
And, time just kind of runs away with us. But, and I don't get to see her like face to face and talk with her that often.
No, I get it.
So
she flew all the way over from Canada for like 2 days or something.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I totally understand why you did it. But yesterday was funny.
Yes, sorry.
It's like the apocalypse had come.
It's a good thing we didn't do any recording yesterday.
Well, we were supposed to. We were supposed to record this yesterday. You're just like, man, let's not do this. Actually, in hindsight, we should have totally have done it. It would have been really funny. I think our listenership would have gone up massively. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. So we were talking about what we're going to learn. And so the first thing, I'll just go over it again. How blending stories with actionable advice keeps your audience coming back for more, and how consistency is key to growth, something we often talk about on this podcast.
All the time.
Yeah. And finally, why repurposing podcast episodes into short form content captures attention and drives more listeners. Very
good. Yeah, very good. So we're going to get into all of that with the legendary Steve Pemberton.
Mm-hmm.
Should we play the clip?
We should.
Let's play the clip and then we'll be back. Here's Stephen.
What techniques do you use then to engage your audience and keep them invested in your podcast?
So, great question. The way that I do that is I do that twofold. So one is through the show and the other one is, of course, through social media. Mm. And through the show, the way that I do that is similar to what we talked about earlier is I want there to be stories. I want there to be practical steps. And then normally what I'll do on the show is once I've done those two things where I basically bridge the story to the practical step is I will say, hey, this is how you can implement this step. So I will actually be directly breaking the fourth wall and talk straight to the audience where I'm saying, okay, so if you are someone who is in this position where you are just starting out and you have not even got on a show yet, here is some steps that I would take. So go sign up for this website. Their accounts are free to start. And then you just start messaging shows and you get on those shows. That's how I would start getting on podcasts today. And that way it gives them something practical. It gets the audience engaged. And then usually what I'll do, because my audience, and this is also when you start growing your podcast, is understanding who your audience is. For me, for my podcast, because it's usually small to medium-sized businesses, but I do understand that there's also angel investors and some other people, is if the podcast is relevant, and what I'll do is I will say, okay, so this is for people who are newer. Here's the step. If you are newer, this is what you should do. Now, I also understand there's people on here who are listening that you have been in business for a very long time. You've been doing podcasting for a very long time, and you haven't seen the results yet. Here are some things that I would do to be able to change your podcast from just being something that takes up 2 to 4 hours of your week. And it actually produces more business. It actually helps grow your social media. These are the things I would do. So what I would do what you just heard Jim say is that Jim, he does 2 podcast episodes a week. He promotes it on his social medias at least 3 to 4 times a week. And that has grown his podcast from getting 2 downloads a month to 1,000 downloads a month. So now he's in the top 20%. And just what he's done is he's just done more frequency. So he's done more frequency. And in the terms of doing more frequency in podcasting, as far as recordings go and recordings released, he's also doing more frequency with social media. So of course, more things you put out, more opportunities for people to engage with you. So that's what he's done. So if you're somebody who's a little bit further down the road and you're only doing 1 episode a month and you want to get more downloads, do more episodes. And so I try to do those 2 things where I will talk to the audience in terms of newer audience and in terms of people who've been around a little longer. But that's the way that I keep them engaged there. On the other side is with social media. I want it to be engaging. So of course, social media. So when I put it, like LinkedIn is my home when it comes to the podcast side. And what I do there is I put one up on my personal profile. It's me as the host. I think one mistake that I've seen newer podcasters make is that they immediately try to differentiate themselves from being the host, where they'll host the show, but like Voice Like a Lion podcast has its own page, has its own Instagram, but they only promote on that stuff instead of promoting on their own page that they've probably been growing for a very long time. It's like, if you really mean it and you believe that this is something that you're going to do for at least a little while, it doesn't have to be forever. I'm not telling you to make a lifelong commitment. This is not marriage. What I am saying is to go all in, commit that you're going to do it for a while until you discover this is what you really want to do. Put it on your social media. Unless you're somebody with a giant following, if you're somebody like me that does not have a giant following, it's okay if you make mistakes. If your posts look terrible, that's the best time for them to look bad. But for me, the way I've kept my audience engaged is I'm just always honest. Like when my post is, hey, the reason why I talked about it earlier, where I had the gentleman who helped Kobe write his last book, is as I get excited on my post is, hey, I just interviewed this guy. He was the co-author of The Mamba Mentality, and in his pictures, because he's a photographer, his pictures have impacted me because I played basketball my whole life. Some of my favorite players he's photographed. This guy is the reason why I went all in on basketball. And because I'm excited, now people will say, oh, well, if he's excited, then that's going to show up in the show. And then on the other side, too, is short form content. Using your long form content, which is your podcast. So you're at least usually 30 minutes to an hour. And you're taking that and you're cutting that up. You're getting the best bits out of it. So there may be a question that you asked that you're like, man, I feel really great about this question. And they had a really great answer. Is can you cut that up into 1 minute segments? Because you have that initial post that goes out that says, hey, this is the guest. This is why I'm so excited to have them. Here's a couple of things, couple of nuggets that they gave me that changed my life. Go listen to the show. And then maybe that same day. So typically I'll do it same day or I'll do it next day. Is then I will release a short form piece of content that is one of those nuggets. Like this is one of the nuggets that changed my life. Yeah. And so that way people can get connected and they can go listen to the show.
If that got you curious and you want to catch the full episode, be sure to subscribe to the show. We've got plenty more great conversations coming up.
Yeah, I should. Just singing along to the music there, and Sadaf was like, you should keep going. And I'm like, yeah, you don't want that.
I have to bear it. Yeah.
Oh, I like it. There's a little dig at Matt there, which if you listen to the other podcast, you'll get the little dig. You're going to have to explain that now.
All right. So
it was really funny. I thought, good on you. I thought 10 out of 10 for that one.
Oh, thank you. I don't usually get that from Matt, so that's great.
Oh, there's another one. Matt never gives me any praise, ever.
So at the end of Matt's episodes on his podcast that he hosts, he likes to say that we're created awesome. So he talks about the guests being created awesome. He talks about, and then he says it's a burden that they have to bear, right?
Yep.
So he says, I have to bear it. You as the guest has to bear it. We all have to bear it. So that's where I was going with that.
Yeah. It's very good.
Bearing
Very
with
good.
Matt's singing.
I was talking about bearing the fact you have to be, you're just bearing awesomeness rather than singing. But okay. I like it. Me lucky. That's good. So let's talk about Stephen and his insights into podcasting. So what did you pick up? You took lots of notes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. And your point is what exactly?
Okay, so I mean, I thought it was a great clip.
It's going to be one of those shows, isn't it?
Sorry, guys.
I'm really sorry ahead of time. It's a really glick show.
I thought it was a great clip because I chose it.
That's such a good reason. I know it's a good clip because I chose it. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. But I really did like what he was talking about, blending the stories with the actionable advice.
Yeah.
Because I think it makes, like, when you're pulling stories in, you're making the episode or that segment memorable.
Yeah.
And I think it also helps the listeners connect with the guest or the host, whoever's telling the story. And then I think it's also, because it's memorable, it's easier to hold on to the advice that's coming out of that and then to be able to apply it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good technique. It's a good.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've talked about this before. I'm fairly sure we've talked about this before on the show. About storytelling.
Yeah.
I think we talked about it at length recently, haven't we?
Yeah, with Stephen Pemberton.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not going completely lunatic tunes here. I mean, yes, it is the same old thing, isn't it? Stories work. Stories capture people. Stories convey emotion. And actually bringing the insights of that story is really helpful. I think I mentioned last time when we were recording, I put a clip on LinkedIn from the Neil Rogers podcast.
Yeah.
About his son. I think again, I'm really sorry if I didn't, but in my head that I've talked about this a lot recently. So he comes on, he talks about his son who, in effect, he couldn't really communicate with for 30 years. But in the last 2 years, he has been able to find a way to communicate with his son, who has a form of dyspraxia, who's silent autism. So had everything in his head, but just couldn't, his brain couldn't form that into words and get it out, if that makes sense. So he couldn't really communicate outwards. But now he can. They found a mechanism where he can do that. And it was a very emotional story.
Yeah.
I mean, super emotional. And I used that clip on LinkedIn, and it's probably been one of the most responsive clips I put on for a while because of the emotion of the story, right? Yeah. Especially from dads. Dads, I mean, just reaching out, just, saying all kinds of lovely things because they empathize with I mean, as a dad, you kind of go, wow, if you couldn't talk to your kid for 30 years, or couldn't communicate with your kid for 30 years, that would be insane. And so they found that super inspiring. And that's the emotion that you can convey with a story. Yeah. Just a real small clip. I don't know how long it was, like 90 seconds from the conversation.
Yeah.
I suppose what I didn't do, listening to Stephen's advice, is we didn't splice that with his end point, in the sense that when I asked him how he coped with this, and he talked about, being positive, and being positive means so much, doesn't it? But some of the practical things that he and his wife did, which I thought were quite helpful, I could have sliced that into the story a little bit. But I think on its own, it stood out well enough to make you want to go, as a small clip, I want to listen to the rest of this. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that's what what Stephen was saying too, about creating short form content, like taking out memorable or key moments and to help drive people to the full episode. And I think it would have accomplished that.
Yeah, definitely. I should probably check the stats. I don't know how, but I think it's, yes, you get a lot of comments on the clip, and that story in itself, that clip in itself would be enough for me to go, I want to hear this. This guy's going to be inspirational. Yeah. This is going to be an insane story that I want to know more about.
It was a really good episode.
Yeah. It was. I bet you were gutted you never got to record that.
No, I thought you did great. I really did.
Okay. Because you were supposed to record it.
Yeah, I was, yeah.
And I was lastminute.com.
Yeah. But I knew, you're a great host.
Oh, bless.
And I knew it would be
safe hands and all
good.
that.
Yeah.
No, it was a really interesting chap, and it was such a great podcast. It really was. I really enjoyed it. But his stories, just taking those clips out and using those, really powerful. Really, really powerful. especially on LinkedIn. I'm sort of experimenting a little bit more with LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Reels are good, like if you do the short form content we've done it before, haven't we? We've done short form video on Instagram. We've figured out a few things that you have to do for it to make sense. Like we used scheduling software originally. That didn't really work. Although the clips went out on time, they never really got the traction.
Yeah.
So you have to download the clips into your phone, post it through Instagram on your phone using
their music.
Write your caption. That tends to get more involvement, doesn't it? Doing it from your person. We used to have, I dare say we still have a push Instagram account.
We still have it, but we're not
using it anymore.
Yeah.
So now they just go, or in theory, they'll go on my Instagram.
Yeah.
So yeah, those kind of short form clips, I think you have to play the platforms a little bit, which is why I think just choose one or two platforms, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
YouTube Shorts, I'm kind of 50-50 about it at the moment. They were really good. I don't think they're anywhere near as good now. I think YouTube is sort of, I don't know, it just feels like YouTube have gone off the boil a little bit with YouTube Shorts, and they're focusing back again on long form content.
Okay.
Mainly because the ad revenue is on long form content.
Okay.
And YouTube ads are killing it right now. And so a lot of people are turning to YouTube ads. And so I think they need the long form content to feed the ads. So I think they're getting promoted more. It is complete conjecture. I think someone out there will go, Matt, you're talking nonsense.
Well, let us know.
Yeah, let us know. I probably am. But I think platforms like LinkedIn, especially for like EP, and which is my podcast, e-commerce podcast, if you don't know. And then I have a podcast called Push, which is about leadership. Those podcasts, a lot of our audience are on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn is a really great platform for us to use to promote those clips on. Instagram is okay. Facebook, I've never even tested with Facebook because I don't think our audience is on Facebook. I could be wrong. But I've never... Well, I say never. We've not really used Facebook for a few years, have we?
A long time, yeah. We used it for e-commerce podcast, didn't we?
In the early days,
yeah. But I think whatever you choose to do, going back to the second thing that we were going to talk about was the consistency part of it.
Yeah.
You just have to be consistent in it.
Yeah.
And eventually it will take off.
Yeah, that's the hope. I think you have to... Social media is a funny one, isn't it? And using these short form clips because... On one hand, consistency is key, but on the other hand, you have to do what Jim Collins said, which is confront the brutal facts, right? So we've tried short form content and we have been very consistent, but the numbers have been, well, not very good.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
You're talking a few hundred as opposed to several thousand, which is what you want, really. You want the tens of thousands. And I think if you're doing consistency... but you're still getting low numbers, then something somewhere needs to change. And that's a good sign. I think the first sign is always consistency. Are you being consistent? Because I think platforms like TikTok, it used to be, and I don't know if this is still the case, you put a short form content video on TikTok and it's your first one or your first few, they are going to give you so many views because they want you to get addicted to being on the platform and think, wow, it's so easy to get a shed load of views on TikTok.
Yeah.
And it's not so easy carrying on from that, but they do play the system a little bit. So I think if you are doing something consistently, that's your first port of call. But if you're consistently getting average results, then keep the consistency, just change the parameters. So for us, for example, being consistent but not using post scheduling software, but instead doing it from our own phones, experimenting with things like still images with quotes and stuff like that in, does that work? All of those kind of things make a big difference. I think consistency then experimentation.
What do you think, Matt, are some of the challenges that what are some of the challenges for maintaining consistency in things like this?
I think the lack of results. I think it's not difficult to maintain something that's working well, if that makes sense. It's difficult to maintain something when you don't get the results that you think you should get straight away. And you see that, the obvious thing here is the gym, right? People start going to the gym, they don't see the results straight away. there's no consistency. In fact, there's just pain. I just really hurt. I don't want to do it anymore. And it's that consistency, or I'll go to the gym. Sometimes I just can't be bothered. And so the workout quality is, they track it on this Whoop thing, don't they? And so sometimes the Whoop goes, well done. Sometimes it goes, oh, come on, you lazy tyke. And you're just like, oh, shut up. And so it's one of those where I think the results tends to cause you to get disheartened. And this is where I think you have to look beyond the numbers sometimes. And there is this fine balancing act. So, with the downloads on your podcast, I think a lot of people stop because they get to episode 10 and they've had 4 people download.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, well, hang on a minute. I'm doing this for 4 people. It doesn't make sense, or I've not seen the results that I want to see. So you then obviously slow down, or you'll stop doing it, or you go, this is not working. And I think that's a shame, because I always think the first part of anything, with a podcast, the first 20 episodes, with social media, the first 3 or 4 months. Do you know what I mean? All of these things, it's never going to be great.
Yeah.
But that's where you need to be consistent and experiment and push through it. And eventually, you get there. It's like that expression, isn't it? No one ever gets thin eating a salad. No one ever gets fat eating a pizza. Yeah. It's what you do consistently day in, day out that matters. So I'd say results are a big problem. So it's knowing what to manage. What to measure. So once you know what to measure, so I never look at a podcast download. Someone asked me today, how many downloads do you get on your podcast? I have no idea. I genuinely don't care. Yeah. And it's not, it's the wrong statement. It's not that I don't care. I know on EP they're great. I know with Push they're good. But downloads is not my primary mechanism of measuring success. Yeah. For me, the primary mechanism, or one of the things that I want to understand, is, was that a really great conversation? In other words, if I just had that conversation and it was only me and them and I didn't record it, would I still have gone and done it? Yeah. And the answer is always yes, because I always learn something, especially on the EP side. And that conversation with Neil Rogers, would I do that again? Absolutely. If no one was watching, in a heartbeat, I'd do that again. Yeah. So that's the great thing, that you've got to figure out how you define success in what you're doing, and measure the right numbers, I think. And then the second thing is busyness. I think if you mix a lack of results plus a general busyness, people start out in podcasting, or they start out in social media thinking, I can do that. And then realize actually there's a lot of work involved. Yeah. I'm like, social media, but full cards on the table. There's too much work involved for me to want to do that well. I really don't, I'm not motivated enough to care. Yeah. And I'm aware of that. So I think what we do is okay. It's there if people want to see it, but to do that well is going to require a lot more work. Yeah. And therefore I'm not consistent in doing that amount of work. Does that make sense? If I want to grow the YouTube channel, the amount of work needed to grow a YouTube channel is insane. Yeah. So, but again, we hear the stories, don't we? Someone starts a podcast and 2 weeks later, they've got 100,000 downloads or whatever it is. So the outliers, and so you measure your success by, I've only got 4 subscribers. Plus it's really hard work, and I've got to grind because I'm starting it, and everything when you start is just hard work. I've got to go get the guests. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. So I think busyness has a real habit of robbing us of consistency. And that's where I think discipline comes in. It's knowing what to work on, what's important. But I'm a big fan of the big rock theory. You know the big rocks? No, you're looking at me confused. Yeah. You do know the big. So this is, if you've seen the experiment where they take a big glass jar and if you take the big rocks, put the big rocks in the glass jar, then you take the medium rocks, you can put the medium rocks in the glass jar, and then you take the small rocks, and they sort of go around this, but you can get a lot in. If you do it the other way around, if you take the big jar, put the small rocks in first, then the medium rocks, you're never going to get the big rocks in. Yeah. Do you see what I mean? And so it's all about understanding that I have this 24-hour block of time. I have to put the big rocks in first, then I have to do the medium rocks, and then the smaller rocks, if that makes sense. And so if you do that and plan your time well, I think it can work. It's when we get shiny object syndrome, it's when we get overwhelmed, it's when we don't see the results that we don't want to see, that I think we stop being consistent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
You going to add anything?
No, I think you've summed it up really well.
So we all sound surprised, to be fair. So yeah, I think don't let it rob you. Don't, keep going. But just be, I think you have to be intentional.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to create something out of nothing, you have to have a plan. Mm-hmm. You have to know what you're going to do at the start of every day.
Yeah.
Right? And you have to be intentional. And without getting overly religious on the whole matter, if you look at the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, the earth was without form and void. Mm-hmm. God got up every day. I just have this image of God getting up every day. Right, today we are going to do X. So God said whatever. And then that happened. So there was something that didn't have form and void. Mm-hmm. It was every day there was a clear plan. Mm-hmm. That plan was executed. It was a logical plan. Mm-hmm. It kind of went from point A to point B to get the final outcome. Mm-hmm. And at the end we had a big rest. And I'm kind of like, well, okay, this is very straightforward logic that even I can follow. So I think, when you're starting something or when something's not clear, when something's without form, when something's void, then that logical plan, that step-by-step plan, knowing what I'm going to work on today, mm-hmm. execute on that plan, that's, I think, where most people, is that where most people fail? I'd say a lot of people don't know what they're working on at the start of a day. They're just very responsive. But be intentional. This is what I'm going to do today. And then execute on that plan. Those things create tremendous amount of success. Yeah. It's when we don't know what we're doing or we know what we're supposed to but don't execute. Mm-hmm. That's problematic.
Yeah.
And so that's when you create overwhelm. That's when you kind of feel burnt out because all the things you should be doing, you're not doing. I feel like this is going in a very different direction, maybe.
Yeah, sorry.
No. It's a fascinating conversation.
If we can scale back what you've just said, and so if you're just starting out as, or you've recently been podcasting, or you're feeling burnout, then I think what could be said is that when you're first starting, you don't always know. Like you talked about having a plan. So yes, mm-hmm. have a plan, but you don't necessarily know what issues you're going to run into until you run into them.
Yep.
So having a plan around those, and you were talking about the big rocks. So what are those? And if you need tools to help you with those, figuring out what that looks like, or if you need a team that you can delegate to.
Exactly.
All of those kinds of things. But I think having that purpose in your head that this is what I want to achieve, even if it gets hard and challenging, I'm going to push through, and these are the things I'm going to use to help me get through it. Yeah,
exactly. You just have a little think about what it, like we've tried different, because we're quite we know we're a small team, mm-hmm. and that to scale, we either need more people mm-hmm. or are there tools out there that can help us? So we experiment with different things. What makes our job easier? Some of them work, some of them don't, mm-hmm. right? Riverside would be one that's currently working.
Yeah.
Originally it didn't.
Yeah.
But is currently working for us in our sort of processes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, what's going to help you do that? But again, big rocks, medium rocks, small rocks, mm-hmm. super important, and we could do a whole podcast on what they are.
Yeah.
But I think with podcasting, your big rocks are getting the interviews, getting the episodes out. Your medium rocks are going to be things like short form social media content.
Yeah.
And then your little rocks are going to be like, transcripts on websites. Do you know what I mean? There's different priorities. So what's the most important thing? The most important thing is to get the interview recorded, to execute on that, know who you want to talk to. If you're doing the interview style podcast, obviously, if you're doing a panel or whatever, get the podcast recorded and get it out there. Mm-hmm. That's your primary objective, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest is just, okay, we'll fit these in as and when we can. Mm-hmm. So that's prioritizations, maybe another way of putting it. Yeah. Very good. That was a fascinating little sidetrack there, all courtesy of Stephen Pemberton, who is still a legend. But I do like this conversation. I thought that was a very good question. What stops consistency? Very good indeed. What do you think? Am I talking absolute nonsense? Or is it actually helpful? Either way, we know. But yeah, let us know your comments. Let us know your thoughts. What stops you being consistent? I think is a really interesting and very, very powerful question. What stops that consistency? What stops you executing? What stops you, getting to the end of the week and looking back and going, that was really good. And I think knowing the answers to those questions is a really important. I don't think it's the whole point or the whole strategy, but I think it's certainly part of it. So, definitely have a little think about that. If you're struggling with consistency, what is stopping you? And thinking that through. So we'd love to hear from you, actually, hear your thoughts on it, because I think it'll be a fascinating conversation to keep going. I dare say we will over the coming weeks. Speaking of coming weeks, what's next?
So on Friday, the full episode comes out with Stephen Pemberton.
Excellent. Looking forward to that.
And for next week on Tuesday, we will be having a segment from Mark Asquith, who is from Captivate.
Very good. Captivate FM, if you don't know, is the platform that we use for our podcasts. And so we upload all our audio podcasts to Captivate. They are a UK company, and we really like them. And so it's cool you got to meet Mark, because he heads up Captivate, right? And so that's a bit of a coup, getting him onto the show. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you just reach out to him and say, come on the show, Mark?
Yeah.
Skills. This is why podcasting is great, isn't it? You just reach out to industry experts and say, come on the show. And Mark's one of those.
Yeah.
So, and was he a nice guy?
He was a nice guy, yeah.
Yeah? Did you get on well?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Mark's like, never call me again.
I know, right?
And so what do you and Mark get up to? What do you talk to him about?
I talked to him about his journey, because he didn't start off in podcasting. He's been in it like from day one.
Yeah.
He goes quite far back.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting understanding it from his perspective, like how the industry's evolving and how he first got into it and why and all that. So all of that will be in our next segment as well.
Fantastic. So make sure you subscribe to the show and all that sort of good stuff, because you're definitely not going to want to miss the conversations with Mark. Do check out the full episode with Stephen. I say the full episode. The full interview is maybe a better phrase, isn't it? So in case you don't know, if you're new with us, obviously a very warm welcome. The way it works is, Sadaf, usually, I've done a few. To be fair, you're doing the lion's share of them now. Interviews a guest, someone in the podcast industry. We take that interview, we cut it up into little snippets, and we have chats about it, like today, like how it affects our business and our own podcast and what we can learn from it. And then we play you the full interview. So you hear snippets of it in the last 4 weeks, or you've heard snippets of the interview with Stephen in the last 4 weeks, but now you'll get to hear the whole thing, which is usually about 45 minutes to an hour long.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can't get to with the setup that we have, because we can't look at every clip. It would be really great to be able to do that, but we can't do that. So we tend to spend about 3 or 4 weeks on a guest prior to the release of the full episode. Yeah. So you do check it out. Do make sure you listen to the full episode with Stephen. And of course, reach out to him. Do say hello. Let him know you heard about him on the show. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Always go and say how's it to guests that have had an impact on you. That's my advice. And just let them know where you heard them. Because again, I think people want to know. So yeah, go ahead and do that. But yeah, anything else to say?
No, not from me.
That's unusual. You're still feeling the effects of the 4 a.m. Well, the last dig comes from Matt. It's just a burden we've all got to bear, right? Oh, brilliant. Well, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking with us. Thank you for joining us this week. Sadaf and I will be back next week, but that's it from the pair of us. Bye for now.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode at Pod Junction. If you've enjoyed the insights from this episode and want to hear the full conversation with today's special guest, don't forget to visit podjunction.com, where you'll find more information about how you can join Pod Junction cohort. Whether you listened while on the go or in a quiet moment, thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Remember, every episode is a chance to gain insights and to transform your business with podcasting. So keep on tuning in, keep on learning, and until next time, Happy podcasting.